Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whoops. Haha. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever it is for you. For me, it is just past midnight on Tuesday, September the 10th. That makes this the news for Monday, September the 9th, 2024, day 930 of Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. I'm Peter Alexievich, and this is the Live at 5 from Kyiv. We're back in Kyiv again, having spent last week in Odessa. I cannot thank everybody enough who supported the Odessa trip. Your support makes the extension of this program and what we are capable of delivering possible. And I particularly want to thank the sponsors of tonight's live, RP and Fitz. Fitz is a stalwart bedrock supporter of this channel, and I can't thank him enough for his support of the Odessa trip. I see the peeps are coming in. Hey, Eli. Hey, Jason Willis Starrin, how you doing? Hey, Cheyenne. Hey, Mike Now. Hey, Nightshade. Russell Kennedy is here. How you living, brother? PH. Hey, Darlene. Andy. Jessica. Bobby. Bobby's been very active, chatting all over the place this week. Good to hear from you, Bobby. Hey, Nicola. Evening, Cheyenne. How's everybody doing? So, guys, it is Monday, September the 9th, 2024, day 930 of Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. And in this conflict, we have seen all kinds of loss. But today we were hit with a really unexpected loss that I think we have to start with. And that is the loss of David Knowles. As many of you know, there is a podcast called Ukraine the Latest, brought to you by the Telegraph out of London. David Knowles, 32 years old, was one of the founders of that podcast. He and his colleagues over there, Dominic Nichols, Francis Durnelly, Hamish de Bretton Gordon, I quote them almost every day here. I cannot begin to tell you how much Ukraine the Latest, the podcast, influenced my decision to come to Ukraine in the first place. I can't tell you how much I learned from these guys, how influential they have been in my understanding of this conflict. And to see this young man, a quarter century my junior, struck down in the prime of his life after 670 episodes of an integral journalistic activity that brought more attention, more voice to the voiceless of Ukraine than I could ever hope to do. It is a striking loss. Shocked and saddened to the bone, says Yorkshire Tea. And I couldn't agree more, pal. That young man was a shining light, a beacon for the cause of Ukraine in the world. And it's just life, right? I mean, he was safe at home in London. But there you have it. We don't really know, Russell, just that he suffered a health problem. Whether it was a heart attack or a stroke, we don't know. an aneurysm, we do not know. But just 32 years old. When I think of the impact he had in his life by 32 and how much more he might have accomplished, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. Amidst all the other tragedies, we have this one. So the entire Ukraine community, everybody that supports the cause of liberty in Ukraine, I'm sure is feeling the loss of this voice. And for us here at the channel, I think I speak for everyone when I offer my most sincere and deepest condolences to his family, friends, and colleagues for a life lost, but a celebration of a life well lived. You can't fault him for that, boy. You cannot fault him for that. His insight, his intelligence, his compassion. We mourn the loss of this critical voice in Ukraine's fight. The loss of David Knowles, one of the founding voices of Ukraine the Latest podcast. So again, our deepest sympathy to the family, friends, and colleagues of David Knowles from Ukraine the Latest. Boy, that was something I never thought, I never even imagined, never crossed my mind that we would have this conversation. Okay. Jessica is saying that according to the Telegraph, he was in Gibraltar at the time and it might have been a cardiac arrest. All right. So again, I want to thank the sponsors of the Odessa trip, all of them. They are too numerous to name, but tonight we celebrate RP and Fitz as the sponsors of tonight's live, our first live back here in Kyiv. And we will start with last night's missile and drone attack. Last night, the Russians launched 8 Shahed drones and 3 missiles. Territorial defense shot down 6 of the drones and 2 of the missiles. It is being reported, the EU is claiming that it has credible information that Iran sent 200 missiles, ballistic missiles, to Russia, and that they were delivered on September 4th. Now, if you think about it, that's right before we started talking about the Iranians delivering missiles to Russia. And so according to EU intelligence sources, those missiles, 200 Iranian short and mid-range missiles, were delivered to a port in the Caspian Sea on September 4th. So the Russians have them. Where they are and when we can expect to see them in the territory of Ukraine is another story. The Iranians, for their part, are officially denying it. However, one Iranian MP did not and made it clear. We sell missiles to Hezbollah. We sell missiles to other countries. We supply missiles to the Houthis. We sold missiles to Russia. He was very fucking clear about it. In distinct opposition to what the official line coming out of Tehran is. However, it's worth pointing out that Tehran's official position is that they also do not supply Shahed drones to Russia. So that's a load of shit, as you can imagine. Ukraine summoned the chargé d'affaires, the Iranian chargé d'affaires, to the parliament to answer questions about this. and to threaten Iran over the delivery of these missiles. Not that I think it's going to do much good. So what we see is an emboldened axis of evil. Tehran, Moscow, Pyongyang. These guys, these autocratic nightmare regimes that hold their own people hostage, are doing everything they can to see that Ukrainians get unalived at the hands of the Russians. And every night here in Kyiv, we face a barrage of these axis of evil weapons. Iranian drones, North Korean missiles, Russian weapons. And now add to the list these Iranian missiles. Bertie says, don't forget China. Bertie, you're not wrong, but the very fact that Russia has to go begging to North Korea and Iran for missiles is a testament to the fact that the Chinese aren't helping with lethal aid the way that they might be. Oh, sure, they're backdooring sanctions, they're buying cheap oil, they're, passing dual use and chips across the border. But what they're not doing is sending train loads of missiles. Right? So while there is an implicit alliance with China, and China does implicitly support Russia, China knows what side its bread is buttered on. Its key strategic alliances with the United States, right? Less than 5% of its exports, less than 3% of its imports go to or come from Russia. They could abandon Russia as a trading partner and really never feel it. With a little hustle, you could make up that 3 and 5%, no problem. The situation couldn't be more different for the Russians, who now count on China for 36% of their exports and 33% of their total. 1 in 3 exported rubles or goods in ruble value go to China or come from China. 1 in 3. They lose China, the economy collapses. Bertie says China is playing both parties. Yes, they are. You couldn't be more right. Is it normal for the U.S. Air Force to fuel German planes over U.S. soil? I don't have any idea, Michael. Why are German planes over U.S. soil would be my first question. If it's a joint military exercise with the United States, then sure, that would be normal, right? Like that would be a normal thing to do. Jets have very limited fuel supplies and they burn a lot of fuel. So refueling in air is a normal thing to do. We have planes dedicated just for that. Richard Chapman is saying, yes, the U.S. fuels NATO aircraft. Sure they do. That would make sense. Joint exercises, says the Jedi. Joint exercises, right? That makes perfect sense. So in this edition of Russia on Fire, in Belgorod, there's a fuel depot still burning. Now, this fuel depot is adjacent to a rail yard. So the fuel comes in on rail cars, it gets put into the storage tanks, the train goes on, right? But apparently, this oil depot was struck at a time where there were trains there transferring their cargo. And so the fire has spread from the fuel storage yard to the fuel trains now. And they too are burning. Yeah, I'll tell you, fuel is going to be a real problem in the Russian Federation in the near term. And I, for one, cannot voice my support strongly enough that Ukraine continue this process of defueling Russia. That's what stopped the Nazis. That's what'll stop the Russians. When they don't have the fuel to run this war, they have to stop. So let's hope for more of that. On the subject of hoping for more of that, we had a conversation last week about those thermite drones, right? Those drones that are dropping that high impact thermite that just burns everything in its wake away. Well, not only did video surface over the weekend of a thermite attack on a fuel truck and 4 tanks, all of which were destroyed by the Dragonfire drones, but additionally now 8 additional videos in 8 different locations have surfaced. It would appear that the Ukrainians don't just have some new toys, they may be evolving a new capability. So we've got 10 instances of this. It's like somebody just made the point in the comments that one of the things it does is like napalm. It gets rid of all the vegetation, clears it out, so there's nowhere for the enemy to hide. Not only does it burn them alive in the trenches, it burns everything out so that there is nowhere for them to hide. We'll see if there's more of this, but right now, boy, they are Dracaris, baby. Dracaris. New reserves and engineering troops have been deployed to the 2nd defensive line in Kursk. So it appears that the Ukrainians are not only advancing, but they are digging in. And so more troops are, not less troops, more troops are being sent to Kursk. They are reinforcing their 2nd defensive lines, and they are apparently pushing forward. So this could indicate, as Zelensky said last week, that the Ukrainians have no intention of leaving Kursk anytime soon. It's already now, tomorrow morning, it will be 5 weeks that Ukrainian soldiery are going to bed and waking up in what used to be Russia. And those habits, those activities become habits. You get used to it, right? 5 weeks now, battalion after battalion of Ukrainians are waking up on Russian soil and feeling more and more at home, building the defensive lines to repulse the inevitable, one would think, Russian counteroffensive. Now, for their part, the Russians at the highest levels seem to be doing their best to ignore Kursk or say it doesn't matter. Putin himself is behaving in the strangest of ways. He's going out into crowds, looking for photo ops, taking selfies with teenagers. Does any of that sound like the Putin that you know? The guy who wouldn't sit within 65 feet of a diplomatic guest or an important member of parliament? No, it's crazy. He is clearly having some trouble. That 3rd permanent bridge over the same river. Video emerged over the weekend of the Russians slowly, very carefully driving Buhanka vans, you know, those little the Scooby-Doo vans, and motorcycles and small vehicles over that bridge. Well, today it appears that the Ukrainians have had enough of that shit, and they hit it with a HIMARS strike. And so that 3rd permanent bridge that was hanging on, that was providing some ability to cross the river, it appears that that is now completely out of commission. At the same time, just north and west of there are reports of a new Ukrainian incursion. Now, we don't know if this is a reconnaissance in force, if this is an outflanking maneuver. We don't know yet how big it is, how serious it is, or what their intention is. But it does appear now that the Ukrainians in Kursk are coming at the same river from the east and now from the west, and they got 3,000 troops trapped in that pocket south of the river. Bertie, you mean the Kursk bridge. So Bertie said there that he hears that the Kursk bridge is falling apart. And that is my understanding as well. Apparently that attempt to drive a fuel train over it did not do it very much good. It appears that it is increasingly compromised. Now, Michael Surface says, well, how do the Ukrainians advance with no way to cross? The Ukrainians are already south of the river, right? You got the river, let's say it's right here. Then you have Russia here, and Ukraine is on all three sides of them. That's Ukraine. Ukraine closes that pocket, pinches those troops off, takes them prisoner, refills the prisoner exchange fund. And then Ukraine doesn't have to figure out how to cross the river because they already control territory on both sides of it to the east and to the west. They don't have to cross it, right? So it's a completely different scenario for the Ukrainians than it is for the Russians. The Russians are stuck while the Ukrainians have freedom of movement. Warped Lake says we call that a double envelopment. And as I understand it, that is true as well. Bobby says down there, is Ukraine still holding in the Prokofsk direction? They are, Bobby. Now, out that way, in Toretsk, Pokrovsk, and the Kirkova direction, the Russians have all made, Sersky said they haven't advanced a meter. That's not quite true. They are making slow, grinding, attritional advances in the Toretsk, Pokrovsk, and Kurakove directions. However, it appears that the tide may be turning. It appears that the Azov brigades, supported by, I forget, it's one of the mechanized brigades. I don't think it's the 47th. The Azov brigade, supported by one of the mechanized brigades, has now reclaimed positions on the northwest side of New York and northern part of New York and are pushing towards central New York, putting New York squarely back in a gray zone. So the Ukrainians, while they are giving some ground in those other directions, it would appear, are beginning the first phases of their offensive on the Eastern Front. Now, this is a big deal because the Russians have been pushing forward, right, to the tune of 750 square kilometers in the month of August, right? About as much ground as the Russians took in the 6 months before that. So the Russians are moving forward. This is the first time in 6 months on the eastern flank that we've seen the Ukrainians start to really push forward. That could signal a new change. And Bertie, you are right. The Russians have suffered huge losses. There have been losses on the Ukrainian side as well. Don't get me wrong. But the Ukrainians have not suffered the way that the Russians have. Not even close. There's lots of estimates. We don't really know the truth. It's a bad situation no matter how you cut it. Now, it could be, look, if the Ukrainians are sending additional reserves into Kursk, it could be what some analysts are saying might be right, that the whole Pokrovsk front is nothing but a trap for the Russians. And when the Ukrainians are ready, when they think the Russians have sacrificed enough, they will close that trap and cut them off, capturing, putting them in a cauldron, putting them in a pocket, capturing or unaliving everybody that's in there. It's not impossible. It's not impossible. We shall see. We are approaching, or now we're even on, the 25th anniversary of the Moscow apartment bombings. Some of you may remember these. The Moscow apartment bombings were Putin's excuse to start the Second Chechen War. Putin and his FSB goons blew up apartment buildings around Moscow and blamed it on the Chechens in order to build public sentiment for the war against the Chechens back in '99. It is unbelievable, right? This is where we get the whole idea of false flags from, because the Russians actually do this shit. They blow their own people up so that they can drive consensus for a war. It's insanity. It's insanity of the worst sort. And it goes to the point that you can't deal with these people. You cannot negotiate with terrorists. And on that point, I want everybody to do me a favor, please. Well, I got two favors to ask you. First is this: never, ever, ever again put the words Russian and elites together as if that was something that made sense. There's no such thing as Russian elites, the elites. We keep hearing about the elites in Moscow, the elites that are going to stop Putin, the elites that support Putin. This is bullshit of the worst order. These fucking guys are nothing but gangsters, thieves, sadists, scumbags, and terrorists who have profited off the oppression of their own people to the point where 99.9% of the wealth in Russia is controlled by these 500 people. They are not elites. They are scumbags of the worst kind. And we gotta stop using this term that they gave themselves so that they could feel like they were more important and better than everybody else. It is just the opposite. They are the worst people in the world, and they deserve a name. And I can't think of one. I can't think of a good one. They're parasites. Bobby, you're right. The Russian parasites. That's what we should call them. The Russian parasites, not the elites. So that's the first favor I got to ask everybody. A is don't ever talk about Russian elites again. And if you see commentators talking about Russian elites, maybe make a comment on their material saying, shut the fuck up. Stop it. Stop giving these grandiose sons of bitches any credence, just cut it out. Stop calling them that. They are the worst of the worst, the lowest of the low. There is nothing elite about them. End the elites rant. The other favor that I have to ask you is our buddy Camel Toe. And that's his call sign, Camel Toe. Don't look at me. Talk to his wife. Camel Toe is not on TikTok, but I want him on TikTok so that he can come on here and talk to you, and he can answer your questions, because he is a member of the 1st Battalion of the International Legion, and he has been deep in the shit in Chasiv Yar and Donetsk. This is a guy who knows what's going on the front. This is a guy, Eli is saying down there, she's already followed him. And I appreciate that, Eli. Cheyenne, would you be so good, please, as to do me a favor, or Vanetta or who's ever available. Up there it is. Thank you, Vanetta. You read my mind like Radar O'Reilly, ahead of the curve. At Trev the Trev. At Trev the Trev. Now, most of the regular listeners of this program and regular followers of this channel have already followed him, right? He's gone from 2 followers before me. 2 followers to 130 at the last I checked. And it's all us, right? And that's okay because we want him here so that he will come on this program and tell us what it's like out there, what the real problems are in the trenches, what the real fight is like. We can hear it straight from the horse's mouth. This guy is a good guy, and he's been in the shit. And so if we can get him on here, he will be happy to answer your questions, I think. And you will be happy to have your questions answered in an intelligent way by a fellow who is living it, is living it. This is a guy who stepped on a landmine. The story of him stepping on the landmine is incredible. But, yeah. Jason Momoa, that's a new one. Boy, I'd take that, boy. I wish I was like Jason Momoa. I love that guy. Jack Black, Jack Nicholson, I get those a lot. Jason Momoa is new, definitely. He must be getting old. Jason must be getting old. Thanks, Jessica. Okay. Sweden's largest airport was shuttered this weekend as drones were detected in Swedish airspace. They were, of course, Russian drones. Infinite, you need to see your ophthalmologist. They were, of course, Russian drones detected in Swedish airspace. This is the first time we've seen Russian drones in Swedish airspace affecting airport travel. Russian drones crashed in Latvia and Romania over the weekend. Add Poland and Belarus historically, and you've now got 5 countries whose airspace has been invaded by these Russian drones. That's why we need our NATO partners in the surrounding areas to step up and enforce a no-fly zone over the western part of the country. There is no reason why our allies cannot participate in shooting down aviation that threatens to invade their airspace before it does more damage to Ukrainians. Nightshade mentions, for their part, the Lithuanians put dragon teeth at the border with Kaliningrad. That is true. As I understand it, he's right about that. That the Lithuanians are aware of the danger of a Russian military presence next door to them, and they have taken some initial steps to build a defensive line there. Nothing like what they are doing in the west of the country. I'm sorry, in the east of the country. But an initial step to protect themselves from potential attack from the Kaliningrad direction. The Vault 8 Telegram channel, which is a Russian mill blogger, Vault 8, was on the Telegram complaining vociferously that the artillery shells they have been given have different power weight distributions. So what this means, look, if you got a piece of artillery and you put a shell in it and you watch where that shell goes, right? And let's say it's 3 feet to the left of the target. Well, you tell your targeting guy, he adjusts the azimuth on the gun, and then you put a new artillery shell in, and it hits the fucking target. That's how it's supposed to work. But it only works if all the shells are exactly the same. Quality control. You got to have quality control. And if all the shells are the same, then you can make those adjustments and the weapon becomes accurate. But if I put a shell in and I see where it lands, and then I try to adjust to the angle of inclination, and now I put a new shell in, and that shell has a different gunpowder to weight charge, you have no idea where it's going to land. This is why the Russians have very little accuracy with their artillery. This is why the Russian methodology has been to simply level everything, because it's all they can do. They just keep throwing they don't know where their shells are going to go, and they can't figure it out because the next shell has a different power to weight distribution ratio. So he was complaining vociferously about this. And there's nothing to be done between the poorly maintained barrels, which does not help with the targeting either, and the fact that you're sourcing your shells from half a dozen different suppliers, one of them being North Korea, where we know there's no consistency and a 50% dud rate. The only option you have is a scorched earth policy where you just try to blow up everything. And that's precisely what they are doing. Video surfaced on Telegram this weekend of a Russian soldier complaining about Order 647. Now, we've talked about Order 647 on this channel before. It's the order that Putin gave that essentially prevents anybody from leaving military service. Anybody engaged in the active fight in Ukraine basically does not know when they are going home. There is no end to their contract. There is no end to their service. Now, he was not just complaining about that. He was complaining about the fact that he's been badly injured and forced to return to the front. And so you don't even get out if you've been injured. And increasingly, we're seeing video of Russian troops with crutches, limbless, at the front, trying to do what they can do. He was also complaining at length about the money. He's making $250 a month. He's supposed to be making $50,000 a year. And he's bringing home $250 a month. He wants to know where the rest of his money is. Which goes to the point that these guys are not fighting for any patriotic cause. They are not fighting out of a sense of loyalty to dear leader. They are not fighting for anything other than the cold, hard cash, and they ain't getting that. Birdie says he could surrender. You're right, Birdie, he could. The Russians could pull out of Ukraine. You're right, they could. They're not going to do it. And he's not going to surrender because he believes that his surrender will end up in his unaliving. He's seen the paperwork. The Ukrainian orders that say we will not take any prisoners, summarily execute everyone. Those documents aren't real. They're forged by the Kremlin to appear to be Ukrainian. But they are circulated by the command among the men so that the men are facing certain death from the enemy or certain death from the rear in the form of Akhmat or Africa Corps barrier troops, which is the role that those troops are serving in Ukraine today. That's a real thing. They shoot their own people. August was the second deadliest month in this war, July being the first. For civilians, pardon me. It's most deadly for civilians. 184 civilian casualties. 184 civilians unalived. 856 injured. It's been a tough month. That first 96 hours last week when I went to Odessa were tough. And now that there's 200 Iranian missiles likely in Russia, we'll see what the next couple weeks hold before the mud season comes. Now is the time for Russia to push. Now is the time for Ukraine to push back. We'll see. I'm back in Kyiv. Yep, it's fine. I'm tired. I was lucky. I came back today. I had an acting gig. I had a commercial shoot. And so I was in the studio all day. And that was on the heels of a red-eye bus, a 7-hour bus ride overnight from Odessa. So I am exhausted tonight, I'm sure. And I'm still a little bit sick. I'm sure you can hear it. But we're plugging along, kids. We're plugging along. Hey, if you're all there for me, I'm going to be here for you. Russia is suffering a yuan crisis. So the Chinese yuan, the denomination of money in China, is the major currency in Russia these days. They can't use dollars. They can't use euros. So all international transactions are being handled in yuan or in United Arab Emirates. I forget what their money's called. Dimras, something like that. So all foreign currency exchanges, all foreign dirhams, thank you, Bertie. Dirhams or dinar, it's one of those. It's one of those. So the Russians have a good relationship with the United Arab Emirates. Shortly before the ICC warrant was issued, Putin was in UAE. And the banks in UAE have been supporting Russia. That is quickly coming to an end. The Chinese especially, as well as the UAE folks, the banks in China, the banks in UAE are afraid of secondary sanctions. They are afraid of pissing the United States off and being put on a sanctions list. And so, because of that, payments for Russian goods, oil, gas coming into China are delayed by months. Months. Some people haven't been paid in 8 months. This means that the yuan that should be flowing into Russia isn't there. Without the yuan there, which is needed for all of the international business that Russia does, because again, they don't have access to dollars or euros on the currency exchange. The price of the yuan is way up. It's at one of its highest points in 5 years, at 1 yuan to 1273 rubles, to almost 13 rubles, 1 yuan to 13 rubles. So close to its all-time high there. Russia is now owed billions. Russia's now owed tens of billions that is not being paid by Chinese banks, again, because they're afraid of secondary sanctions. On the international scene, tomorrow is the U.S. presidential debate between Trump and Harris. What's the ruble worth today? The last I checked it, Bobby, it was at 90.5. $1 to 90.5 rubles. Now, that is an 8% erosion in the value of the ruble since the Kursk invasion. In the 5 weeks since Kursk, that's an 8% loss. Now, you have to admit, I do think it's important to give credit where credit is due. The Russian central bank, through its currency controls and interest rate hikes, has managed for the last year to stabilize that ruble. However, in the words of the central bank administrator just last month, we have done everything we can and further interest rate hikes will not help to support the ruble. You give me $1, I give you 90.5 rubles, 90 and a half rubles. Oh, Steve, you're behind the times. They raised the rates last month. It's 18% now, pal. The core, now that's the core bank-to-bank overnight rate, is 18%. Yeah, man. Yeah. Don't try to take out a credit card or a car loan in Russia right now. You cannot afford it. Nobody can. Now, in addition to the U.S. presidential debates coming up and the U.S. election November 6th, it is worth pointing out that there are critical elections coming up in Georgia. October 26th. October 26th, elections in Georgia. This is a key domino to watch. That Georgia has been backsliding under the control of this billionaire idiot Shekhavali, I apologize, Shekhavali, something like that. This idiot who is beholden to the Kremlin for his billions and who thinks he owns the country has said pointedly that he is going to outlaw he's not even in the government, but he owns the big political party that controls the government, owns it. He's going to have them make illegal any political party that could threaten to get 5% of the vote. Can you imagine? He's threatening to make illegal any political party that could take 5% of the vote away from him. That is a slippery slope back toward USSR-style authoritarianism. And it is well underway in Georgia. How the Georgian people respond this October is definitely a domino to watch. There is a lot of talk about how the U.S. does more than any other country for Ukraine. And, you know, it is worth mentioning that the Germans alone, with an economy nowhere near the size of the United States, have single-handedly donated 34.9 billion euros in aid to this country. That's about $40 billion. The Germans alone have contributed nearly a third of the military aid that the United States has. That's huge. Sweden, for its part, with a GDP a tiny fraction of the United States, has just put up its 17th aid package of 400 million euros, almost $450 million, for combat boats, RBS-70 ammo, CV-90 artillery shells, and more. And I just want to take a moment to note these contributions by other allies. Spain, for its part, is sending a Hawk defense system. They just announced this weekend. And the Netherlands, in its effort to get a Patriot battery system cobbled together through some international partners, has just announced that they are adding 3 more launchers to that effort. There is a movie out, Russians at War. It is being derided as a Russian propaganda piece that glosses over and whitewashes the Russian war crimes in Ukraine. And there's been a lot of flack because it's at the Italian International Film Festival. and it's supposed to be at the Canadian International Film Festival later this month. For all my Canadian friends out there, maybe you can do something about that. Get it down from there. If they want to show a movie about the Russian army in Ukraine, show 20 Days in Mariupol. That's a view of the Russian army in Ukraine. Anthony Blinken is headed to London to meet with Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer, for his part, says that he intends to try to persuade the Americans to get on board with long-range missile strikes against Russia. This is on the heels of former UK Defense Secretary Grant Shapps publicly endorsing a plan to provide or to enable the Ukrainians to make those long-range hits into Russia using storm shadows, which they are currently prohibited from doing under UK policy. For all the UK people out there that bitch about the United States policy on long-range weapons, I encourage you to look to your own government because they got the same fucking policy. And while I bitch at my government, you bitch at yours. Keep the focus there. Richard Prexis is saying that movie is supposed to be shown at TIFF tomorrow. I don't know what TIFF is. The UCC is calling for anyone in the area to protest it. I don't know what the UCC is either, but I like that protest. No, it wasn't. That movie was not financed by Canada Renvox. The director is Canadian. I don't think that's right, David. I could be mistaken, but I don't believe that's right. Thank you, Idis. David Fraser says the UK don't have rights to allow Storm Shadow without US aid permission. Why the fuck would that be, David? They're your weapons, your policy. What do we have to do with it? Well, I am unaware of that. Sounds to me, yeah, it's funny. You know, the British, right? They're always deriding the Americans. Now, all of a sudden, you have to kowtow to us. You have to do what we say. I think that's a load of shit. I don't think you have it right. I think you're making excuses for your own government. That's what I think. It's a load of shit. Fucking British. I'm so tired of you people. Ugh. No. James Earl Jones? Oh my God. What a day. I'll find out about the fucking storm shadows. But I think you're all full of shit. James Earl Jones. Jeez. Comes in threes. David Knowles, now James Earl Jones. You know, David, I think you need to travel more. Anyway, so the big thing, the big news today, in my opinion, was the loss of David Knowles. from the podcast Ukraine the Latest. And I think we can all agree that that was a tragic loss for all of us. David Knowles, one of the founding members of, and as I understand it, the fellow who conceived of Ukraine the Latest, the podcast, which has done more to give voice to the plight and the problems and the conflict here in Ukraine than probably any other single outlet has with its single-minded devotion to this cause. We lost a really critical voice today. And all of us, I think I speak for all of us when I express my deepest condolences to David Knowles' family, friends, and colleagues. He was a large and important voice, and I know that I learned an awful lot from him. And he will be missed, sorely missed. Sorely, sorely missed. If it's true that James Earl Jones also has passed away today, that's the loss of another great voice, literally. What a great voice in the world he was. And so that's it. Those are the top line news stories for me today. I want to thank the sponsors of tonight's live, RP and Fitz, Dark Irish. Could not do it without you guys. I want to thank the moderator team, the best moderator team on the Tickety Talk, Cheyenne, Vanetta, PT, Jay, and Travis. I want to thank Nightshade, who has the Peter's Peeps group over on the Book of Faces. And I want to thank Vanetta Laird, who has the Google Doc share, and Lars, who has the Discord server in the Alexievich archive. And with that, we will, forgive me, everybody. I'm awfully titchy when I'm not well. Holy shit, it's 1 o'clock? How did that happened? Holy cowbunga. Okay. Let's just take a look here. Good night, Yorkshire Tea. Good night, Eli. Good night, Nightshade. Good night, Ballerina. Wow, I'm really shocked by that. Thank you, LL. Good night, Chef Deb. Yeah, I'm going right to bed. All right, good night, everybody. Thanks so much. Take care.